cost any more than the plaid outfit and purple sweater the girl 2 seats up was wearing, but it looked different. And whatever had possessed her to select yellow? It stood out like a neon sign. The bus lumbered up a rise and through a copse of trees. Jessica's features, palely limned against the dark background of foliage, made a pallid pattern on the window glass. The blue of her eyes hardly showed, only the fair skin, bleached by a long winter in the office, and the light brown hair. The effect was spectral. She closed her eyes, too tired to turn for another look behind. Being afraid was fatiguing. She could understand now why a hunted man might suddenly stop running and surrender himself to his pursuers, even when capture might mean death. In her case, terror was increased by bewilderment. She did not know why she was being threatened, which meant that she had no clue as to how to defend herself. As she looked back now, a number of incidents fell into place, making a pattern which had not been visible until the one key incident occurred and gave meaning to the whole. A pattern, but only in the sense of consistent behavior. The motive still remained obscure. But there was no doubt in her mind now that the man who had taken her suitcase at Southampton had not done so by mistake. It had been a close call. She had looked away for only a moment to hail a taxi. Her 2 big suitcases had been sent on. They had arranged that for her on the boat, and as soon as she cleared customs, she had simply carried her one remaining bag out of the building and had stood by the street looking for transportation. The man who brushed by her was only one of many. There was a crowd near the quay, people embarking and disembarking, seeing friends off and meeting them. When, having obtained her taxi, she looked down to find her bag gone, her first assumption had been that it had been kicked or pushed away. If she had not happened to look in just the right direction, if her bag had not had that long, ragged scratch across one end which made it unmistakably hers, if the policeman had not come strolling by in time to hear her call, "Hey, wait a minute, mister, that's my suitcase!" The man's reaction had been quite natural. He glanced back over his shoulder. Casually, as was to be expected, a lot of people were yelling at one another, and he wouldn't assume her hail was directed at him if he made an honest error. But his seemingly casual glance had seen her and the tall blue form beside her. He had returned at once and made his apologies. Why should she have realized that the incident had any hidden meaning? She had done equally idiotic things in a fit of momentary abstraction. She hadn't given the matter a second thought, nor taken any particular notice of the would-be thief. She had observed his mustache only because it was impossible to ignore it. Big, brown, and bushy. The mustache had effectively obliterated the features which surrounded it. The man was taller than she was, but then practically everybody was. Medium height, medium frame, medium everything, including the voice. She had heard only a mumbled phrase in the accent Americans think of as Oxfordian, and in a tone whose huskiness might have been assumed for the occasion. Yet perhaps the incident colored her feelings without her being aware of it, for she found Southampton disappointing. The clerk at the hotel was supercilious. The cost of the room was higher than the travel bureau had told her it would be, and the room wasn't ready for her. It was too late for lunch and too early for tea, so Jess left her suitcase at the hotel desk and went for a walk. By that time her mood was so bad that she would have sneered at the Emerald City, and Southampton is not the most picturesque of English cities. She got lost, and her feet hurt. When she arrived back at the hotel, her room was ready, but the momentary satisfaction of this fact was immediately cancelled when she realized that her suitcase had been searched. The search had been thorough and unsubtle. The contents of her bag looked as if they had been stirred with a spoon, and her tube of toothpaste appeared to be missing. She found it in the bathroom, flattened on the floor. Its former contents festooned the washbowl like a long white snake. An older or more determined person might have called the manager and complained. Jessica was not timid, but she was still young enough to dread appearing ridiculous. How could she raise a fuss over a tube of toothpaste? Nothing else had been taken, not even her one piece of decent jewelry, a string of cultured pearls which had belonged to her mother. 2 telephone calls later, she was on her way to the bus depot and the last evening bus to Salisbury. Really, she kept telling herself, there was nothing interesting to see in Southampton. And now she would be in time for Sunday service at one of England's noblest cathedrals. The bus was a gleaming modern monster, an express which roared contemptuously past the green local buses. The inn was half-timbered, black on white, straight out of Elizabethan days. The smiling receptionist cheerfully produced a late supper, eggs and thick slabs of bacon, hot muffins and a huge pot of tea served with cream and lemon and brown sugar. Jess went to bed in a state of deplorable smugness, congratulating herself on her decision. She woke at dawn next morning with a renewed sense of the excitement which Southampton had almost destroyed. Her room was a funny little cubicle, all odd angles. The interior walls had the same blackened beams on whitewashed plaster as those which adorned the facade of the inn. There was a prosaic wash-basin in one corner and an electric heater beside it. Shivering in the glorious May weather of merry England, Jess flipped the heater on and leapt back into bed until its coils glowed orange-red. She abandoned, with no more than a slight qualm, the idea of a brisk morning tub. The corridors would be 10 degrees cooler than the room, and she refused even to imagine the probable temperature of the bathroom. After a hasty splash at the basin, the water was blessedly hot. She huddled herself into her clothes, thanking heaven for the experienced friends who had warned her to bring plenty of sweaters. Then she opened the leaded casement window and leaned out. The fresh morning air felt the way chilled white wine tastes, light, heady like the concentrated fragrance of spring. She was high up over the old town. Across the gabled roofs of Salisbury she saw the spire of the cathedral, as slim and graceful as a girl's lifted arm. The most feminine of all the English cathedrals. She had read that in some guidebook. Now she understood what it meant. After a hasty breakfast, she was on her way. She walked fast because it was that sort of morning, not because she had any sense of being followed. It would have been hard to conjure up a premonition of ugliness in that setting. Down Blue Boar Lane to Castle Street. The very names conjured up the past, and there were old houses, converted into shops and inns, but lovingly preserved. Their curved black timbers looked bowed with the weight of years. Sunlight streamed down into the narrow streets, floodlighting old facades and sparkling off an occasional gilded crest above a door. The breeze lifted Jessica's curls, and she tied a bandana over her head. A few minutes later she came out of the populated streets onto what was called simply the town path, a long, gravelled foot and bicycle way across the water meadows and over Longbridge, which crossed— Of course, it was the River Avon. Stratford, she reminded herself, was not the only town upon Avon. Jess leaned on the rail of the bridge and rejoiced. The scene was straight out of Constable. Or, to be more accurate, Constable had captured the scene and the atmosphere. How lucky she was to see it like this, with the vast blue arch overhead spattered with floating clouds. Across the tender green of the meadows her eye passed over the pale, earth-bound clouds of flowering fruit trees, to fasten on the perfect facade of the cathedral and its soaring tower, set on the meadows like a jewel on a green velvet cushion. She wandered on, stopping frequently to enjoy visual gloat, for each few feet brought a change in the picture, or in its frame of greenery and flowers, or in the shape of the puffed, gliding clouds. Amazing how satisfying primary colors could be, blue and white and green. But they weren't primary colors, that was the whole thing. The blue was a tone that most artists failed to catch. The green was not one shade but 1,000, shifting endlessly under the sun and shadow and wind, from chartreuse to emerald, through the whole spectrum of greens. After a certain point the view of the cathedral passed its prime, and she hesitated, wondering whether to turn back or to follow the path to its end. But the decision was not difficult. It was more fun to explore new terrain than to retreat, and the path ended somewhere in town near the cathedral. Of course, that view from the bridge. But it was the sort of thing that should not be experienced too often in a short span of time. Like a second piece of chocolate cake, it spoiled the memory of the first taste. Later she wondered what would have happened if she had retraced her steps. Had they followed her from the town, and would she have met